So obviously, this is Answers in Reason, answersandreason.com, and this is Conflated and Misunderstood Terms, Volume 13, Agnostic Atheism. So it's an article reading, so I guess I'll just start reading. Agnostic Atheism. It's very common to hear folks use the term agnostic atheist to describe themselves and others. Let me say you are free to identify how you like, though I would suggest you don't be prescriptive with your identification on others. If you wonder why, consider if you are the sort to tell others what their gender is. Yes, I understand gender is a more sensitive topic, but we're speaking about identity there. It's one thing that I think we see quite often, don't we, Dave? Folks are so determined with their definition of, atheists and agnostic atheists and things like that. They tell everyone how they should identify, which I think's a little bit unfair.
It is, and it's my main crux of the problem that I have with those kind of definitions, and the people that kind of hold them. It's anyone who's not a theist is an atheist. It's up to you to decide what kind of atheist you are, agnostic or gnostic, and that's it. That's the only options that are given, and it's like, yeah, you might identify as atheist or and just plain old agnostic, but those terms are meaningless now. We're here. We decide what you are.
Definitely, and that is, as Dave says, it's the most frustrating thing. It's why we constantly get into those conversations with other atheists, because we're trying to say, well, no, it's not completely up to you to decide how other people are using the terms. There's plenty of literature. There's plenty of definitions that have been either around longer or maybe are more sound, more valid. So why do you have to be prescriptive with your use? Fine, define it how you like for you, but don't tell other people what their position is.
Exactly. And stop using the etymological fallacy to defend it.
I even experienced one of those today, actually, Dave.
No.
I did, yeah. I was in that group. In fact, I sent you the end of the chat. And I was,
oh shit! I've not looked. I'm sorry.
No, we had a discuss on it on WhatsApp earlier. It was that image that I sent
one.
you. Yeah. But it was just one of those things where they were claiming that someone was wrong for using a definition. And in fact, they didn't even use that definition. They said, if atheism is defined this way, does it mean this? And then they turned around and went, no, that's not how it's defined. That's wrong. Your if is wrong. And I was like, well, actually, that is how it is defined in certain circles. Atheism is polysemous, so it can be defined this way or that way. And here's an article that explains different ways that it's done. I gave the set atheism and agnosticism, and she was like, "I'm going to stick with the etymology." I was like, "It's an etymological fallacy." Just so you're aware, words have uses. Etymology is not the entirety of a word, and I discussed a few different things, and the evolution of the term over the years, and yeah, whatever. You have your opinions that back you up, but I'm sticking with the etymology, right? Great thinking there. Atheists who claim to be rational, and we're atheists ourselves, and we'll probably make the same claims, although not always. But we find that generally atheists claim to be rational, and that evidence will change their mind, and you show them some evidence, and they just go to it, and you're like,
yeah.
Okay, then.
I was just about to lay odds on how often they said, all you need to do to change my mind is show me evidence.
This particular one hadn't said that at all, but yes.
Oh, but I'll guarantee you they had said it. They have said it, and they will say it again.
Yeah, I'm definitely sure on that.
Yeah.
So to get back to the topic, that said, it's fine to discuss a position. No, it was me who took it off there. Don't worry about it. It's fine to discuss a position and definitions, etc., and point out any problems with the logic you might find. Both the terms agnostic and atheist are polysemous, and their multiple meanings are actively used everywhere. With language, there is no invalid use of a word, but there are more logical, rational, sound uses of words. Another way to think about it is there's times when there's contextually correct uses of words as well. So I'm an atheist, as is Dave, by pretty much all definitions that are out there that I've heard. But my position on agnostic atheism is that depending on the definition used, it's either nonsensical or superfluous. And I'd like to invite all of you out there to consider my thoughts on the matter and maybe put forward your own.
Do you have a copy of the quadrant image in here anywhere? I can't remember.
I don't have it on this particular one, no, but we can load
Okay.
it up. I've got it on the definitional problems with lacking belief. So we'll load it up after this.
Okay, no worries. It's just something I've noticed about it that I keep forgetting to mention and don't ever mention. But yeah, I mean, the nonsensical thing is correct because, like you go on to say in here, but there's also I'm an agnostic atheist, so you don't know if you're an atheist?
Yes.
Because that's basically how it reads.
It is.
It's if you're going by the etymology like they seem to do, agnostic, without knowledge, atheism. So you're without knowledge of your atheism.
Exactly. I think that's one of the things I do mention later on when I compare
Nice one.
the different uses of the words agnostic and atheist and how they link together. Just going to quickly check to see if the stream is still working. It looks
I've
like
got
it
it
is.
loaded up.
Excellent. Yeah, no, it's just because we've been having the issues recently. I'm a little bit nervous that it's going to happen again.
Yeah, I've got it loaded up. And in
So,
fact, I might load it up on the Pi.
classy. I like it.
Because then I can keep watching on that screen and have it there, my eye on it.
Yeah, brilliant. Good shout. Hopefully in a few months I'll have finally sold this house and bought myself a new machine that can hopefully handle things better. I'm thinking it's my machine just starting to give out. But anyway, back to the article. One of the biggest issues of agnostic atheism is that there isn't even a consistent definition among agnostic atheists, as demonstrated by a post my friend put up on the 4th of February. So I got into a conversation with someone, and he put a link to a Ricky Gervais video. And the actual point that the video was making was actually one that was all right. But Ricky went on his whole agnostic atheist thing, which I think's pretty bad for someone who's got a philosophy degree to be using. And I just, my initial comment was, oh, I really can't watch this if he's going to be going on about that. And he said, no, start at this point and do this. But then why do you not like agnostic atheism? So I went through why, and he posted this post saying, what does agnostic atheism mean to you? So I've captured a number of responses from people. I've cut out their names and images just to make sure that all identity is I'm not trying to make fun of anyone. I don't want to single anyone out. But if any of them are watching, they'll probably recognize their comments. So firstly, we have to examine the word use. And what I mean by that is how people are using both agnostic and atheists, as well as the agnostic atheist identifier. First one we'll address is, to me, agnostic atheist means that whilst I lack the knowledge to know, as it is not there to be had, I don't believe as well. So many contemporary internet atheists without much knowledge of epistemology lean on an etymological fallacy or misunderstanding for both terms. A word's etymology is not the same as its use. Knowledge is a subset of belief. So if you're saying that you lack belief in gods, you're already saying you don't have knowledge. Therefore, the modifier is superfluous. If you only lack belief in gods and you don't hold the positive belief that gods do not exist, then you are in no different of a position which is known as the psychological state of being agnostic, or weak agnosticism. To clarify further, within philosophy, agnostic as a psychological state is suspending judgment. So if we're to consider a proposition which by default is true or false, it means that you're not convinced it is either true or false. If you're agnostic towards the proposition God exists, it means you're not convinced either way. Is that clear enough? Good. An agnostic atheist is one. Oh, sorry, let me say that again. An agnostic atheist is one who does not believe but may change their mind if presented with evidence, ergo, one that doesn't rule out the possibility. Now, this is strange because I'm not an agnostic atheist, but I will change my mind with evidence. Agnosticism doesn't deal with possibility, but fair, language is fluid, so his definition of agnostic atheist is basically, it's possible I'm wrong, but I don't believe God exists. Hey?
It's basically Flu's definition, and Flu just calls it atheist.
Yeah.
Or
Negative
weak
atheism.
atheist.
Was it negative atheism? He went negative and positive, didn't he?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So this is someone responding to me, hence my name being in it. I didn't bother blanking out my own name. You can know my name. The thing is, one term deals with belief and the other deals with knowledge. Face desk. You can have someone that believes something without asserting it as a fact. Agnostic atheist / religious people believe what they believe but do not assert it as fact. Gnostic atheists / religious people will say that they believe is 100% undeniable fact regardless of any evidence presented to them.
Okay. I believe but don't assert it as... I believe God doesn't exist but don't assert it as fact.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, I think... sorry, go for it.
Sorry. I was just going to say, so we both fall under the agnostic atheist, but keep getting told that we're Gnostic atheists because we believe God doesn't exist.
Yeah, or sometimes anti-theists if you follow Randolph's site.
Yeah. But who's going to follow a guy who thought Christians existed 500 years before Jesus? Nobody's going to follow. Oh, wait a minute. People do follow him. I'm sorry.
Yeah, about 50 people.
Yeah, that's 50 more than us.
Yeah,
well,
true.
About 40 more than us.
So the issue with the statement, one term deals with belief and the other deals with knowledge. Knowledge is a subset of belief. Or it's actually, they're both dealing with belief because knowledge is a type of belief. They're just different kinds. So there are many kinds of belief. You think about, you could have a justified belief, an unjustified belief, an irrational belief, and one of these types of belief is known as knowledge. Also, your confidence in a position says nothing of actual knowledge either. If you're 100% psychologically certain, that doesn't mean you have epistemic certainty. Equally, even if you are 100% psychologically certain, you may still change your mind. I know I have been certain before, and evidence / arguments have changed my mind. We've discussed that a few times with things that I've changed my mind on through discussions you and I have been having, and opened my mind to different bits and arguments that hadn't been presented to me before that actually went, oh, blimey, this is far more in depth and well thought out than I'd thought that the arguments for this was. So I need to at least have a think on it, and maybe I'll change my position. So
you can be 100% certain it's not going to rain this afternoon because the sun's out, and then it pisses it down. So, yeah.
Or you could be 100% certain and see a weather report that says, no, it's definitely going to rain now, and go, oh, okay, I'll change my mind. Maybe there is a high chance of rain.
Yeah.
On to the next one. It's an answer to two different questions for me. The former pertaining to knowledge, the latter pertaining to belief. I'm agnostic because I don't know if God exists or not. I'm left with what I'm willing to believe, which brings me to atheist. I don't know if there is any God, but I find the proposition to be unbelievable. Frankly, I also think I think that if people were completely honest, everybody is agnostic.
Well, if everybody's agnostic, then the term agnostic atheist becomes superfluous.
It does, but I think they mean that everybody is
Oh,
either
yeah,
an
I know.
agnostic atheist or. But
I'm just
again,
being a pedantic ass.
I mean, as we can see again, similar issue between the whole knowledge and belief thing, and it also ties into what we've already discussed with I don't know, but I don't believe, with an additional assertion that everybody is agnostic. Right.
Okay.
Quickly just check on that. Cool. The next one. Nobody can know if there's a God, and I don't believe there is one. Everyone is agnostic. Okay, then. Oh, shit.
So, again, the term agnostic in front of atheist is nonsense and doesn't need to be there.
Yeah. The nobody can know bit actually comes close to the definition of hard agnosticism. The theory that gods or the supernatural natural
Yeah.
are unknowable. I mean, I will say that this is potentially one of the better definitions of agnostic atheist, but it's still a bit
Yeah.
superfluous, because we're speaking of your specific ontological position in regards to the proposition God exists, and atheist is being used to say, well, I don't believe. So you're already saying you are without knowledge. The only difference is by saying that's what it means, you're actually making a claim that nobody can know if God or gods do not exist.
Yeah.
And you know what? I do think, in general, that no, we cannot know. And, you know, I do sort of lean that way, at least with current technology. I think specifically about certain gods, at least some in the way they're written, they are as illogical and incoherent as a square circle. So I think we can know some gods do not exist, at least as they're described by their holy books or believers. But right, that's fine. You know, I get that nobody can know, but if nobody can know, isn't it unnecessary putting that modifier in as well? No one can
Yep.
know, but this is my belief position. Okay, if nobody knows,
It doesn't really matter about whether anyone's agnostic or Gnostic,
yeah.
because Gnostics are liars, according to that definition.
So, in that sense as well, the only people that really need to identify is the ones that do claim to be Gnostic.
Yep.
Someone else, so in this one, someone posted a wiki page as a response and just went basically this. So I copied the wiki, which was agnostic atheism is a philosophical position that encompasses both atheism and agnosticism. Agnostic atheists are atheistic because they do not hold a belief in the existence of any deity, and are agnostic because they claim that the existence of a deity is either unknowable in principle or currently unknown in fact. The agnostic atheist may be contrasted with the agnostic theist who believes that one or more deities exist but claims that the existence or non-existence of such is unknown or cannot be known.
Okay. One thing, the term Gnostic means that they know. Okay. But what about the theist who claims that it can be known? It's just that they don't know. What term do we use for them? Because they don't fall under agnostic theist or
Or
Gnostic
Gnostic
theist.
theist. Yeah, it can be known, but we don't know.
Yep.
uh, Although that's I suppose by one of those
Yeah.
definitions that they've used above, they could sort of shoehorn it in anyway. Um, so that one obviously is much the same as the previous, and again seems to be superfluous again. Don't
And
believe
before,
this thing,
hang
but
on.
no one can know. Sorry, Dave, what are you saying?
That's all right. I was just going to say, before we move on from that, how many times have you heard an atheist say, Wikipedia, anybody can edit that? That's not evidence of anything.
I agree. Getting your philosophy from Wikipedia is probably not the best place to go. I have to say, I've in a number of different philosophical papers that I've read about um, atheism and definitions of atheism, and speaking things like hard or strong atheism and things like that. I've not seen one address agnostic atheism as a position other than to say it's a ridiculous position.
Yeah.
So the fact that it claims to be a philosophical position, it's a wickosophable position.
Yeah. I mean,
um,
reading that, it sort of sounds like Randolph or Aaron Ra or Matt Dillahunty or somebody like that has written it. Just the wording used.
yeah. I mean, you know, I do think that Wikipedia has its benefits. It's a great, quick, and easy to read resource on things. It can get you interested in a topic, and
Yeah.
I think that you can go from there, and then you shouldn't take it as the be all and end all. So you go, oh, yeah, okay, so it's a philosophical position. So let's read some philosophy on agnostic and atheism and stuff like that, and then read about it and go, oh, right. It
Yeah,
actually is a
it's a
little.
super starting point. Super starting point. But always check the references at the bottom. And I'm guessing the references at the bottom of that Agnostic Atheism article aren't academic. They point towards things like the American Atheists and things like that.
You can always check, Dave. Look. Uh, they got Flint in there.
So
um,
one,
they've got further reading, which is great, but that isn't really going to be anything. So yeah, and that's about agnosticism as well. I mean, we could actually have a proper read of these ones, but I think it's safe to say that generally it's not got a decent references there. So it hasn't referenced, Draper's article on SEP or Malik's
Oppie or
or
Malik,
Oppie or Mackie or any of them.
Walters. Yep.
So
I'll have a
yes,
look later.
yeah. I mean, maybe we should actually go back through and maybe I'll edit the article and we can address some of the references that they've used there, and actually see how good those references are.
Yeah.
But yes. So anyway, when you're answering a proposition such as God exists, saying no one can know is pretty much irrelevant. What's being asked is your attitude towards the proposition being true and false. After that, you might be asked to justify your reasoning, also known as epistemic justification, or the burden of proof on a belief position. No, that's not to prove it true, just to justify it. No one is asking if you know, nor are they asking if it can be known in general. And I think this is one of the biggest problems. There's almost this fear there of, if you say, well, I believe this to be the case, oh yeah, well, prove it. Well, no.
Yeah.
If you could, there's a fear from many that if you feel like you can't prove a belief, then people are going to call you irrational. And honestly, that's not it. Justifying it, you can justify with logical reasoning and various arguments, responses to arguments. We will show you on Tuesday how we justify our atheism. We will also show you how a lacktheist can justify their position as well. I think in most cases it's redundant, but it can be used to add greater clarity about one's position. It's useful when you want to distinguish atheistic beliefs, i.e., versus strong atheism. Now, this is an interesting one because I like how they realize it's largely redundant, but they are saying they use agnostic atheists to be weak atheists versus strong atheism. Now, when someone uses weak and strong atheists, we also have another issue. Some use weak atheists to be the same sort of position as agnostic, as in suspending judgment, lacking belief both ways, versus strong atheists, one that holds the belief gods do not exist, or it can be used to describe an atheist that holds the belief gods do not exist and the strength or psychological certainty of that belief. So even there, we've got a differing way that we could use strong and weak atheist. Some even describe a strong atheist as one that claims to know gods do not exist, or the Gnostic atheist, which can be an issue for someone like me. If a weak atheist only lacks belief in gods and a strong atheist knows gods do not exist, where am I with someone that just believes gods do not exist? Because I'm in neither of those positions. So what type of atheist am I in that realm, if you use those terms? Agnosticism in itself, so without using atheism or theism, is a cop-out. If I ask someone if he, she, they believe in a god and they answer with, I don't know, then. And then it was a meme of Denzel Washington slamming a door on someone. I thought this was an interesting take because I asked them to clarify how they were using atheist and theist in this sense, though I do realise they said atheism and theism. The original question by my friend was about the definition of agnostic atheist. However, it seems like they were complaining about someone being a fence sitter. So to me, it would seem that both an atheist and a theist is one that holds an active belief rather than a lack of belief. So when I tried to clarify it, what he wanted, how he was using them, he just responded, "That's not up to me." Like,
Okay.
you've just
So it's
given
not up to him how he's using the terms?
In fact, that's my next line. So it's not up to him how he's using his words.
Oh, sorry.
No, I didn't
Sorry.
even. I wrote it 2 weeks ago. I've slept since then. I don't remember what I wrote. So I did have a separate conversation with him on another thread with him about how it is actually better to let your partner in a conversation define words. But the point was he himself had an idea of agnosticism, atheism, and theism based on his post. So I was asking him for his use, but no clarification. What we can see here, though, is there's no consistent definition of agnostic atheist among agnostic atheists. Don't know why I've written theist agnostic atheists. Damn it. I blame Dave, he's my editor. It's not the fact that I can't write for shit.
Neither can I, that's the problem.
So a few others chimed in to that conversation, some talking about how it's a nonsense position, but of those arguing for agnostic atheism, there wasn't an accord on use. There were certain commonalities between them, but, in general, there was no consistent definition. There was, however, another post later in the evening that is worth addressing. Depends on the conversation being had. In general, religious discussion online, I'll use it in the contemporary way of having a belief and knowledge as different axes on the graph. They're the ones you're talking about earlier, Dave, which we will get to. In a more philosophical conversation, then I accept that it's kind of redundant, as knowledge and belief are far more intertwined. So this post speaks of utility and rationality, something I've said myself about the lacktheist definition in conversations online. Whilst it's open to issues as described in definitional problems with lacking belief, there is utility to the lacktheist definition of atheism, as that is how it's commonly understood, at least among certain circles on the internet and in America. Whilst it's not an irrational definition exactly, it is less rational because it doesn't follow the rules of logic to give a clear and precise answer to the proposition God exists or the question, does God exist? It still has utility, and there is an argument for the rationality of conversation if you're not going to be understood. If we used atheist to mean someone that picks their nose, we are all atheists at some point in our life, and the definition is so broad it loses meaning. Not to mention, no one would understand me until I explain my use. So there is a different kind of rationality to using that term. Similarly, this comment shows an acknowledgement that the average person doesn't actually understand much about knowledge and beliefs, and is likely just recycling what the in-group says about the matter. Other atheists say it's only a lack of belief, for example. This is, of course, an ad populum, but many atheists won't accept that and will reject any philosophical material. The one thing one should note, though, is in a more philosophical conversation, what is meant there is by someone that actually understands and is discussing epistemology or philosophy of religion or something like that. The thing to note, though, is when you are discussing knowledge and beliefs, you are having a philosophical conversation. Much in the way, if you are discussing evolution, you are having a scientific conversation. You don't have to be a scientist or a philosopher to understand these things, but you are having either a philosophical or scientific conversation. We correct creationists using the colloquial change in kind or just a theory. So why do we not hold ourselves as atheists to the same standard in matters of philosophy? It seems very close to, if not exactly, special pleading.
They don't do it because philosophy's useless.
Philosophy's dead, man.
Yeah, man. Science has replaced it. Trust me, I wouldn't go anywhere near philosophy with a 10-foot barge pole.
I've got a couple of comments come in, actually. So LB says, I am willing to bet many internet atheists would be philosophical theist or deist, at least if they were convinced a God exists. Not one of the revealed religions. Yeah, maybe. You're probably right. I mean, I do think a deistic approach is definitely a better approach to religion, especially than the Abrahamic religions. I quite like some of the polytheistic religions as well, actually. We had a conversation about that on Tuesday, which it wasn't streaming at the
Didn't go on. Yeah.
Leon says, how late am I? Yeah, not too late at all. We only started about half an hour ago, so I don't know when your message came in. So we've been chatting
There's no
anyway.
such thing as there's no such thing as late. Time is a meaningless concept and construct.
It's an illusion, and lunchtime doubly so.
Yep. There is only now.
And don't worry that you've only read 60% of the article. It's probably quite dry and dull. And you know what? You've got me to read the rest of it to you. So hopefully, we've caught up to where you got up to, and we can interest you with the rest of the conversation. I will be flicking back and forth between sections to try and keep up on the chat room, but I actually uninstalled the program that was dockable elsewhere. Because I was trying to free up space on my C drive, and I forgot to reinstall it from the stream. So I'm trying to read your comments out of the streaming software instead. So I do apologise if I am a little bit slower at responding to any comments that come in. So, on with the show. Bloody semantics. In a conversation, I find it's always better to learn how your partner is using the terms, and as long as there's no serious glaring issues, you can proceed with the conversation from there. I do sometimes enjoy discussing definitions and the best use of a word, but if there's a more important conversation to be had, it's best to agree on definitions and move on. So if someone wants to have a conversation and use non-theist as atheist. That's fine. I don't need to quibble over that, because if we're actually wanting to discuss a particular religion or religions in general, then that's the topic we want to focus on. It doesn't matter that they are this particular type of atheist. The post from my friend came because I was discussing how agnostic atheist is either superfluous or nonsensical, depending on the definitions of the word used. Not to mention that even agnostic atheists define it differently. So not only have muddied the water, adding unnecessary words, but they also don't have a consistent definition. I'm an atheist. I hold the belief gods do not exist. I am open to changing my mind. I am fairly certain gods do not exist, some more than others because they are illogical. Using the philosophical definitions, it's easy to infer what people do and don't believe from their ontological position. Using colloquial ones like agnostic atheist, it is not, as can be seen from the samples of the post. What's more, agnostic atheist doesn't really answer the proposition God exists, or the propositional question, does God exist? For example, does God exist? I lack knowledge and belief about gods. So do you think gods exist? I lack knowledge and belief in gods. So is that a no? I'm not sure. What are you saying? I mean, replace God with something else. Use something like it is raining, or the propositional question, is it raining outside? When you start to apply these incomplete answers to other things, you start to see problems with trying to discern folks' attitudes towards the proposition with their vague and broad usage.
With the rain thing, here's a good example of what you're trying to say. You ask somebody, is it raining outside? And they say, I lack belief that it's snowing. Okay, it tells me you don't think it's snowing, but it doesn't tell me what the weather is outside,
Yeah,
or what you think the weather is outside.
that's a good one, actually. Yeah. And just because you lack belief that it's snowing, it doesn't tell us what weather you do think. So it hasn't answered whether you think it's raining or not. It also hasn't allowed us to go, oh, well, no, I think it's sunny. I mean, that's a clear answer to it. You know, is it raining outside? No. So you believe that it's not raining outside, and then you can qualify it with, I think it's sunny. And then you're actually holding a different belief because I think it's sunny, I believe it's sunny. Again,
Yeah,
clear. Sorry, Dave.
I was going to say, yeah, like you were saying earlier, you can sort of move on and infer other things from that answer. So if you say, do you believe gods exist? And they say no, you can still go on and follow logically from that. But if you just say, like, I lack belief, well, okay, but, do you believe that they exist?
Yeah. So the polysemy of agnosticism and atheism. Both agnostic and atheist are polysemous. That is to say, they have many meanings or definitions. I've described how people are using the terms above, and I felt perhaps we should address the most common uses of the terms individually and how they might work together. So, agnostic or agnosticism. I cover the history and various uses in more detail in what is agnosticism, how does it relate to knowledge and beliefs, but I will summarise the positions here. We have the epistemic principle, the psychological state, knowledge of God, and the colloquial use. So the epistemic principle, we should not say we believe or know that which we have do not have sufficient evidence for, by T.H. Huxley. So it was coined by the late T.H. Huxley to be the cornerstone of the scientific method. This is sometimes now referred to, or is at least very similar to, evidential agnosticism. So what this is actually saying, that even if you do believe a certain thing, if you don't have evidence, you shouldn't say you do it. So you should stay on the fence, even if you think a certain thing, because you don't have enough evidence to support your position. The psychological state, I mentioned that one above. So agnostic as a psychological state is where you don't believe a proposition to be true or false. You are suspending judgment. This is sometimes referred to as weak agnosticism, or even soft agnosticism. Knowledge of God. The theory that gods or the supernatural are unknowable. This is sometimes referred to as hard agnosticism. The colloquial. Based purely on etymology, it is often claimed that agnosticism only means without knowledge. This is sometimes referred to as an etymological fallacy, but it is a common use that needs addressing. Atheist and atheism. Dave has laid out how atheism is defined in many different ways in his article, Rockin' Atheism Part 2, Defining Atheism. There are two I regularly hear brought to the table, although they may have a various number of modifiers as part of their description. Let's call them philosophical atheism and colloquial atheism. So PA and CA. If we think of the ism as the concept and the ist as the person that ascribes to or believes the concept, we have PA as the belief God does not exist and CA as lacking belief in gods. Excluding the issues with how vague and broad CA and the arguments around it are being open to either contradiction or special pleading, let's focus on the interaction with both PA and CA and the various definitions of agnosticism. So, agnostic atheist. Now we have our grounding of the most common uses for agnostic and atheist. We can see if any of these actually work together. We must remember that this should be giving us an answer to the proposition God exists. The Epistemic Principle. This is probably the easiest to address. The epistemic principle is one of those cornerstones of science. It's basically saying to suspend judgment until you have evidence. And even if you do believe one way or the other, discursively suspend judgment until you can demonstrate your position. Therefore, if you identify as either PA or CA, you should have some evidence to support your position and will no longer be epistemically agnostic on that proposition, though you could say you were still a Huxleyan agnostic in other regards. The psychological state of being agnostic, or weak agnosticism. When used as the psychological state of suspending judgment, it means you neither believe the proposition to be true or false. There are a few issues combining it as a modifier to agnostic and atheist in this sense. If you say agnostic atheist, you're technically saying you're suspending judgment on if you're an atheist or not, or suspending judgment on whether you believe God does not exist or not, or suspending judgment on if you lack belief in God or not. So, depending on your use there, it's either superfluous or nonsensical, not to mention if you're already a CA variety of atheist, your position is actually no different from the psychological state of being agnostic because you're lacking belief both ways. You're just not saying that you're lacking belief both ways. You're only talking about one half of the proposition.
Yeah.
Knowledge of God, or hard agnosticism. It's often said that nobody knows and that everyone is an agnostic, which reduces the position to being irrelevant. That's like saying every Homo sapien is human. Kind of irrelevant to point this out, no? So if everybody's an agnostic, then it's kind of irrelevant to point out, especially in conversation. It's also a bit of a claim itself rather than answering the proposition God exists. Is it true that God exists? That's unknowable. Right, but I'm asking for your attitude. What's your actual position? Belief, disbelief, suspense of judgment? Supernatural's unknowable. Okay, so can you demonstrate that claim if you won't answer the proposition? If we use it combined with either PA or CA, it isn't much better. You're left with, the supernatural is unknowable, but this is my belief position. But, you know, what does it matter? Why are you making that claim on top of things? Again, it's superfluous, especially if you apply it to everyone. But even with yourself being the only person you're talking about, when asked for your attitude towards a proposition, speaking of how it can't be known is completely surplus to requirements. You're actually having a different conversation than the one that is on the table when you go down that route. The colloquial without knowledge. Knowledge is a subset of belief, a more rigorous, certain, true, justified belief. There are many types of belief, justified, unjustified, true, irrational, etc. When you believe something, you don't necessarily know it. And I'm speaking of knowledge here. There are different uses of the word know. When you have knowledge, you also have belief. Consider, I know I'm human, but I don't believe I'm human. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? I mean, what do you believe you are in that sense? But the other way round, I believe I will wake up tomorrow, but I don't know I will wake up tomorrow. That makes sense, right? So knowledge entails belief because it is a subset of belief. It follows that if we understand to have knowledge, we have to have belief. We can also understand if we lack belief, we are lacking knowledge. With CA being defined as a lack of belief, the agnostic modifier is superfluous, as lacking belief already denotes lacking knowledge. I also don't see CA as a position being any different to weak agnosticism, other than the fact that they're not defining a whole position, like I said earlier. Also, if I say, I believe I will wake up tomorrow, do you really want me to qualify that with, oh, but I don't claim to know that? So why, with believing gods do not exist, do you feel that needs to be qualified? With every single belief we have, except the God belief, people don't expect us to qualify with knowledge because we will say, oh, I know this, if we think we have knowledge. And as I said, there are different uses of the word know, but at least if someone is using the word know, we can infer that they think they have knowledge, at least. Let's quickly check the chat, see if anything's popped in. Oh, I clicked the wrong button there again. Would you guys think it would be more helpful if we asked atheists to define knowledge? That's from Manny M2121. Hello, Manny. Nice to see you here. Oh, you've already responded to him, Dave.
I try.
And you're right. Usually you get something like knowledge is demonstrable, or similar vague definitions, or like knowledge is something you know.
Yeah, I've had that one.
And it's like, really? I mean, there are various theories of knowledge. So again, even if you go down that route, but many of them can't put their finger on it and do treat knowledge as a different entity to belief. And if you try and take them down that route and speak about various theories of knowledge and try and get them to understand this sort of thing, they'll generally reject it. And they'll go, I know this thing, but I don't believe it. It's like, okay, but now you're not talking about knowledge. You're talking about information that you hold. You know, for example, you might know the Bible stories because you have the information. You've read the stories in the Bible. That's not actually having knowledge of the events. That's just having information. So we don't have that. You know, there's that separation there. So yeah, good question, Manny. And I honestly don't know a better way to address it. It's good to try and break down every little bit and ask lots of questions. But I tend to find that with the whole lacktheism thing, the position is so well entrenched into personality and the responses are almost built in that even if you get someone at a point where they're about to, and you can see it, where they're having all these realizations that, oh, and it could be this, and what about that, and oh, and it does make sense to have this. All of a sudden, something reels them back in, and they go right back down to the beginning, and your conversation starts over again. No, it's only a lack of belief. No, it's only a lack of belief. Which is obviously frustrating.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wish I did know a better way to address this sort of thing with people when they're online. But I do find that again, it's you get the fight mentality with this sort of thing as well. People are more concerned with winning the argument than actually learning something new. which is why even after you can show someone that atheist is, or atheism is defined in a number of different ways, they will still turn around and go, all those other definitions are wrong. This is the only right one. Yeah. So speaking of the definitions, clear and concise definitions. I described above how these terms are polysemous. As such, it can be hard to know which is best to use, but I prefer the ones that are clearest and most logical. If we can, we should apply the rules of logic. So in this instance, we're speaking of propositional logic because we are discussing a proposition. And when you do so, a proposition is binary. It's a true, false, 1, 0. A belief, as in an individual belief, is binary too. You either believe or you don't. When many people consider a proposition like God exists, they will say, I don't believe God exists. This is giving a read of a psychological state, but they are not actually answering the whole proposition. I mentioned before that with something like God exists, there are two options, true or false. What has been done above is simply an attitude to God exists equals true. They have not considered God exists equals false, and thus not provided a clear answer. So when you're answering a proposition, you've got to think, God exists, I do, don't believe. God does not exist, I do, don't believe. So if you believe God exists, it follows that you don't believe God does not exist, and you are a theist. If you believe God does not exist, it follows that you don't believe God exists, and you are an atheist. And if you believe neither proposition is true or false, you are suspending judgment until convinced one way or the other. This is the psychological state of being agnostic. And if you believe both are true, you're holding contradictory beliefs and it cannot be justified rationally. So for more info on that, I've done a couple of articles. The most recent one is You Won't Believe This. So that's trying to break away from using the logical notation and explaining things in different ways. We actually covered that one in a stream about 3 weeks ago as well. So if you're not in the mood for reading, you can actually listen to us read it. And if you don't want to watch the whole stream, I do try and do clips. So if you go to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi highlights, there should be an article reading of that particular article as about a 10-15 minute clip. So obviously I do understand the words are polysemous and are described differently by others. I'm simply providing the normative definitions within philosophy, so speaking specifically of epistemology and philosophy of religion, and how they are defined using propositional logic. But even in philosophy, the definitions are polysemous. So regardless of if you agree with those identifiers, I think you can see how using them does give a clear and concise position in which we can accurately infer what folks do and don't believe, rather than an array of disjointed definitions. There are a couple of philosophical papers worth reading on the matter. So Defining an Atheism and the Burden of Proof, that one's by Malik, and the SEP entry on atheism and agnosticism. But there's plenty of others out there. I mean, look up some atheist philosophers like those two, like Oppie.
Gary Walters.
Yeah, who you reference a lot in your Defining Atheism article, I believe, didn't you?
Yeah.
So
The Cambridge Companion to Atheism is also an excellent book to get started with.
So there's plenty of options out there for you to actually learn a little bit more about it, because it's so common to hear atheism is only a lack of belief. There's nothing more to it. Really? Really nothing more to it? Are you sure? Because there's a hell of a lot of work done on it. So why is there nothing more to it? So the normative use. When discussing a proposition, the normative use of agnostic is the weak agnosticism, aka the psychological state of suspending judgment. Regarding the proposition God exists, they neither believe God does or does not exist. Atheist is used as one who believes God does not exist. There is a clear split between the positions, but they both share a lack of belief in gods. The agnostic also shares a lack of belief in gods not existing with the theist. Throughout the conversation, some folks mention certainty, but holding a belief can be any degree of psychological certainty, and no matter what, none of that psychological certainty is necessarily the same as epistemic certainty or knowledge. Again, if we could get into a conversation about epistemic certainty, there are some that would say epistemic certainty is a level above knowledge, and some would say it's around the same. Depends on the theory of knowledge and etc. So using the normative uses of both words, you're basically saying, I'm unsure if I'm an atheist or not, or I don't know if I hold the belief God does not exist or not. And this is what I mean by agnostic atheist is nonsensical under some definitions of the words. So just to cover off the mixed and confused definitions again. Now, if we mix up the definitions people gave a bit, we could have, I don't know if I lack belief in God or not, or I suspend judgment, or I lack belief. I mean, you can see what it's like with it being superfluous on nonsensical. If an atheist is one that only lacks belief in gods, but doesn't hold the belief gods do not exist, that is exactly the same as the psychological state of agnosticism. When someone holds the belief God does not exist, they are not saying how certain they are. They are not making a knowledge claim unless they do say, I know no gods exists. So it's pointless to even consider anyone actually making that statement. It's akin to a straw man, because if someone goes, I believe gods don't exist, and they go, well, you can't know that. Well, no one said that. Consider, oh, I just said that. It's almost like I wrote it. What someone can and can't know is irrelevant to their belief position, unless something is known and their belief is a contradiction with the facts. What's more, the Gnostics were once a sect of Christians said to have special knowledge of God, but I digress. Certainty. To bring things back into focus on certainty for a moment, excluding moral certainty, there are two types of certainty, epistemic and psychological. Epistemic certainty is knowledge. In fact, some will say it supersedes knowledge, and knowledge is a subset of belief, a more rigorous and conclusive belief. It is binary, you either have it or you don't, and psychological is how strong your belief. It's a sliding scale. I can be 100% certain of something, but not have epistemic certainty or knowledge, and being shown I am wrong or contrary evidence might alter my psychological certainty, for example. I could have epistemic certainty, let's say I'm about to take an exam, but the worry and stress and all that has made me doubt myself. I have very low psychological certainty, let's say 5% that I will pass, but as it happens, I score 100% on the test, showing that I had epistemic certainty for every single question, even though my psychological certainty was lacking. Adding agnostic in as a modifier doesn't clear up the certainty issue, it actually makes it more confusing. And if you're interested in more about knowledge and certainty, you can click on the link on the article. That's the podcast version with a PDF, but there is also a video version which you can get to the bottom of that link, which is on YouTube, and there is still the PDF, so you can read the PDF at the same time we're having the conversation. The fallacy issue. One big issue with the statement atheism is only a lack of belief in gods is that we rarely describe anything purely based on what it lacks, and never on one thing that it lacks. Even if we consider something like someone being bald, there's often hormonal issues or similar that go into that, which is a bit different from someone who chooses to shave their head. Therefore, it's not just a lack of hair that makes someone bald. So, if we describe one ontological position being defined on what it lacks belief in, then we have to allow others too. Otherwise, if we are holding different positions to different standards, we are guilty of the special pleading fallacy. So that means theism can also be described as a lack of belief in gods not existing. Of course, then we have a logical contradiction. Those that suspend judgment and do not believe gods do not exist and do not believe gods exist are now both theists and atheists by that definition, which breaks the law of identity and therefore is an illogical position. So one atheist's answer to this on Twitter was, just choose which you think is the most likely and go with that. So if you think God existing or not existing is more likely than the alternative, then you're not suspending judgment and you're holding a belief that way. So no, it doesn't work. I mean, how ridiculous is that? In summary, there is utility to using agnostic atheist, and we shouldn't tell people they can't identify as such, but we can discuss issues with the term. There is an issue with the term because there isn't really much of a consensus of what it means, even among agnostic atheists. Depending on the definitions used, the term is either superfluous or nonsensical. And to summarise below, I don't know if gods exist, but I lack belief in gods is superfluous because lacking belief already tells us that you don't have knowledge. I suspend judgment on or don't know if I'm an atheist or not is pretty nonsensical because why wouldn't you know your own position? It's possible, but I'm wrong, but I don't believe God exists is again superfluous because the atheist position doesn't claim absolute certainty or of correctness. No one knows if God exists, but I don't believe in them is superfluous because what does it matter if no one knows? And how does it help answer the proposition God exists? Agnostic deals with knowledge, atheist deals with belief, shows a lack of understanding of the relationship between beliefs and knowledge. An agnostic atheist is an atheist open to possibility. Is nonsensical under no definition of nonsensical as under no definition of agnosticism does it speak of possibility, and even with 100% certainty one can change their belief if provided a convincing argument or evidence. Agnostic atheism equals weak atheism, and it adds clarity, except it doesn't because we don't actually know what folks mean by weak atheism in that sense. So as I mentioned, you're free to identify how you like. And there's utility to both the Lactheist definition of atheism and agnostic atheism, but they're not the most rational or sound of terms. And then there's a number of links to posts about atheism and agnosticism that you are more than free to have a little nose around and see what you think.